Good morning, everyone. We are going to wait just a few more minutes and let the rest of the attendees join us. All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. I am Hilary McNeil, and I work in the Institute for Urban Education as the coordinator of clinical experiences and school partnerships. And today with me, I have a co-facilitator, Dr. Trinity Davis, who is the president and founder of Teachers Like Me. We will be stopping the share screen because we want to make sure that you see faces more than anything, because the format of this webinar is more so to learn from our panelists and to learn from the experts who are both all in the classroom, the schools, districts, and communities. And so on behalf of the Institute for Urban Education, at UMKC, I welcome you to this webinar. And may it be known that as the IUE, we come advocating for and contributing to this work that needs to be done, but we also come to this topic humbly, in a place where we know that we can learn from others. We are not the experts, but we're going to hear mostly from the experts, like I said, from classrooms, schools, districts, and the communities today. As this webinar continues, please feel free to use the Q&A box to enter any questions that you may have, and we will make sure that we attend to that towards the end of our webinar today. So getting into our topic, Black joy is a concept that has emerged in multiple places over the last several years. In 2015, Cleaver Cruz began taking photographs of Black joy and posting it on his social media. And from there, the Black Joy Project began. Also, writer, educator, and activist Dr. Bettina L. Love writes about Black joy in her 2019 book, We Want to Do More Than Survive, Abolitionist Teaching and the Pursuit of Educational Freedom. Specifically, she states, there is joy and then there is Black joy. Both are necessary for justice. However, Black joy is often misunderstood. Black joy is to embrace your full humanity, and as the world tells you that you are disposable and that you do not matter. Black joy is a celebration of taking back your identity as a person of color and signaling to the world that your darkness is what makes you strong and beautiful. Teachers who understand Black joy enter the classroom knowing that dark students, knowing their history, falling in love with their history, and finding their voice are more important than grades.
So consider for a moment what you learned in school about Black people or Black history. So most of us will respond with stories that we heard about the Black people's struggles and slavery, Lincoln being the one that freed Black people, and people like Harriet Tubman or Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks fighting to overcome racism. Scholars, authors, and activists help us recognize that while there was pain and struggle, the Black experience is not one-dimensional. So Black joy was and is experienced in every point of history. Consider how this may look different if the teacher is Black versus if the teacher was white in the classroom. And what if the students were Black versus the students being white? So when you think about that, think about also in analyzing curriculum, filling in those gaps, asking for help, and going beyond slavery is necessary to make the story of Black lives and experiences accurate. Additionally, we must reveal the brilliance and assets of Black students to celebrate who they are and to take pride and joy in being Black.
Okay, now we're going to move into our panelists for today and have some questions for them. So our panelists, I would like to introduce you to them. Today we have Cornell Ellis, founder and executive director of Brothers Liberating Our Communities, or BLOC. We have JeKayla Curtis, an English teacher at Lincoln Preparatory in Kansas City Public Schools. We have Vonnie Clark, a kindergarten teacher at Academy for Integrated Arts. And we have Marquis Hall, who is the manager of student diversity and inclusion programs for Kansas City Public Schools. And he is also an IUE graduate in 2016. So we welcome you all here, and I am going to stop sharing so that we can see all of these panelists' face, and we will start with our first question. So the first question we're going to ask all of the panelists to respond to, and the question is, what does Black joy mean to you? And I'll just let the panelists go at it.
I'll go ahead. To me, Black joy is like a two-part thing. So it's individual, personal awareness of who you are, of what makes you special, what is important to you, just getting to know who you are, your identity as African American or just as a Black person. And then I also think about it in a collective sense. And this could go for any race. I think about teaching, like having the full knowledge and awareness of the Black culture as a whole, not the limited information that we've been given, kind of like Trinity mentioned with, slavery and just kind of talking about things from a deficit point of view. I think it's important to understand the full picture and find the joy and understand the humanity of the Black culture. So then you can connect to the joy for yourself and for others.
Black joy means to me is just being unapologetically happy and joyful wherever you are in any setting, no matter who's around you. I think sometimes, I know I did try to hide my outgoingness, even though I'm not outgoing at all, but I love to dance and I would just not want to just because of who's around me. And I think just showcasing that Black people and people of color can be happy and joyful and not be a part of the stereotype that some people think we are when we're happy. And I think just being you, no matter what, and like Vonnie was saying, embracing being happy and being okay with being happy, no matter where you are.
I would even say that Black joy to me means that Blacks can live a healthy and happy lifestyle in spite of every act of marginalization. Additionally, like we have to acknowledge the pain that we've experienced, and we're able to channel it in a way that shows our own resilience, charisma, and even our own creativity. And many of that was explained or shown and throughout many of the protests that were taking place with the death of George Floyd.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Marquis, because I was really like thinking about like the ability and like, forgive me, but like the permission to exist, right? Like I think so many times we're like just fighting to survive. And I think, we often like to think about like, oh, that's an extreme situation, but like, it's really not, like I have, questions about driving around and getting pulled over. Like if I'm gonna get pulled over, like I have a right to be like deathly afraid of that, right? And joy to me can be as simply as just like being allowed to be as I am in this space, right? I think we've heard from, the rest of the panelists about, getting to know like individuality, like knowing what you love and being able to lean into that. And then like kind of being joyful and being allowed to be joyful, right? And I think both of those things and being allowed to like live, right? And to me, like just being allowed to kind of exist and not even necessarily like be like the stereotypical joyful or happy, right? But to be myself and to not feel pressured or pushed or pulled to be a certain person that doesn't come naturally to me or that doesn't, make me feel good about myself or my existence. So I don't know. I think that, this joy can really be to me like as simple as, having the ability to be here and having the right to be here safely.
Thank you. This question is actually proposed to Cornell. I'm gonna have you answer this. We'll leave you on the screen. Why is it important to bring Black joy in the classroom or the school?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we talked a lot about this in our pre-planning sessions, and I think a lot about this in my work as I've rewritten a few of the notes that we previously talked about. I think I've had this written down in my calendar as like Black boy joy, like I've been thinking about this as Black student joy, but there's
I think he was going to say something really good.
I was gonna say, did I pause or did I?
Let's give him a minute and see if he rejoins. And otherwise, we will turn to the other panelists for the question about why is it important to bring Black joy into the classroom? Why don't we go ahead and open that question up to any of you, and then hopefully Cornell joins us.
I think simply just being a Black woman in the classroom is joyful all in itself. It's radical all in itself. So I think that and showing my positivity and my passion for learning and my passion for encouragement and motivating the students, I think that is important enough. Just to be there and show them that you care is super important to bring that joy into the classroom.
I agree with JeKayla. And I also think about students being in the classroom, they're starting out in school, like I teach kindergarten. And as they're students, they're just developing their sense of self, their sense of identity, who they are, what they like, what they don't like. So they're learning who they are as they're going through school. And it's important to incorporate Black joy, not just for Black students, but for all students, to understand the importance, the humanity, the history, the love, the joy, the contribution that Black people have brought into our world and how that translates to them.
Hey y'all.
Okay, you're back.
Yeah, I was scared for a minute. My whole house power went out. Y'all had to like check and look outside to make sure the apocalypse wasn't happening or something. Y'all good?
We're good. Now we're ready for your answer.
Okay. I think I was getting around to how Black joy is important for not just Black students, but also for Black teachers and for Black, people in the community and for Black families. I think a lot about this concept in one of my I do some extended metaphors, professional speaking, when thinking about trying to equate like the educational experience to popular movies that we might see on a regular basis. Monsters, Inc. is the movie that I use to think about joy and fear. When we think about in that movie, these monsters, they live in a world of their own and They are taught that these kids are actually sick and scary and actually can make the monsters sick and can therefore like infect you. And so the monsters have this aversion towards kids and the kid world, and they kind of like set up these walls, barriers between themselves and the kids to ensure that they don't get sick or that they don't get infected by kids. Throughout the course of the movie, we actually find out by like getting to know a kid that kids' joy is 10 times more powerful than kids' fear. And I think we often think about that inside of school buildings, where a lot of our techniques, a lot of our curriculum, a lot of school systems are fear-based, right? Where you have to get a certain grade or not pass, where you have to get a certain amount of hours or not graduate. You have to pass this test or not get a certain grade. These types of either or situations that are tenets of white dominant culture, but that also have like negative consequences or negative implications for not necessarily meeting up to a certain bar or not necessarily meeting a certain expectation, right? Those aren't joy-based applications of school. They aren't joy-based applications of society and life. And what they do is they send these messages to our students, right? About what they're able to achieve and what they're able to accomplish. I wrote down 3 like messages that we send to our kids. We send them explicit messages where we like directly tell them or teach them things through curriculum. They learn implicit messages by what's missing from what we teach them or what stories are not included in the or what perspectives aren't included. And then there's null teaching, right? Like what stories don't we tell? Who don't we talk about at all? And I think oftentimes we're seeing messages to Black students, to Black teachers, to Black family members and community members, right? This implicit or null learning that you don't matter, that you don't belong in this curriculum, that you don't belong in school. And what we see is that, you know, if we're telling students they don't belong in school, then they'll go find another place to belong. And that's why we have so many wayward students that are making poor decisions, because the joy aren't in schools, which doesn't allow them to feel like they have a home there or to feel like they belong there. And so my work looks to push more of that joy through bringing specific educators into the work. And I think like looking at the panel today, we have a really strong representation. I heard Vonnie talking about it when my power cut back on, right? About how important it is to infuse this type of stuff into the classroom on a daily basis.
Yeah, thank you. And so to build on why Black joy is important in our classrooms and schools and communities, I'm going to direct this to Marquis. What obstacles are there to bringing Black joy into the classroom or into a school?
Yeah, there are many obstacles that that we're facing with bringing Black joy into the classroom or the school. To start, we got to think about like the inequitable systems that force many of our children out of the classroom or even the school. So things like chronic suspensions for Black boys, or telling students of color that they're too loud or they're too this or too that. And just not acknowledging the true values and assets that our Black students bring to the classroom. Those things generally start pushing our kids away from the schools. One of the great things, though, is that KCPS is combating this. And so what they're doing is, or we're doing, is we're rewriting the code of conduct to limit suspensions in grades K through 5. So we want to make sure that our students are at school and getting all of the supports that they need in order to be successful. Something else that's really important is to think about the teachers who do not value the language, the culture, the customs that the students are bringing to the classroom. A lot of times what I've seen is that teachers can be dismissive, or they can attempt to even assimilate students into the mainstream sort of culture, but that's not what we want. And then the last thing is, although representation is good, it's just not enough. We need to make sure that we have committed educators in front of our students who are culturally responsive and teach from a strengths-based perspective, and as well as have a really strong commitment to our students. All of those things will definitely make sure that that we're doing what we need to do to support Black joy.
Yeah. Do others have any follow-ups to other obstacles you may see or have encountered in bringing Black joy into the classroom?
What I found was hard is that a lot of the curriculum that we use for English doesn't incorporate Black authors or people of color, really. So that's just a tough one, just in general, just the curriculum altogether. So that's kind of hard trying to teach that and show people and represent.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
I was talking about today about how just a lot of times mindsets and biases that go unnoticed by white teachers that we bring into classrooms. And I think Marquis was touching on this about like asset-based and deficit-based thinking. Like even like the most well-intentioned, even the most well-intentioned teachers and leaders can make decisions that are painted in savior complex or deficit-based mindsets about their students and their families and their communities, which ultimately lead to more trauma and a negative impact on the relationship that you have with that family and that community, right? So like when we think about one of the bigger obstacles, like I talk a lot about personal responsibility. I like literally was sitting across from a prospective educator who was a white woman who was talking about how she was like really excited to get into education and was really excited to start her journey, you know, working with underserved youth in order to provide them with more opportunities, right? Like red flags left and right about like her like intentions and motivations for being an educator. And then we have like further conversations about like her preparation for this role, right? Like what personally are you doing to own your bias, to own your prejudices, to learn up and study on some of these concepts, to spend your free time actually like practicing anti-racism, right? Like I think so many times we have these teachers that are well-intentioned that think because of their well-intentioned actions that they're going to get great results. And they're not actually doing the personal work that has to happen behind closed doors, or that some people may not see, right? But that's actually going to be creating the impact for your interactions with students and families.
So my next question kind of follows up on this piece and goes back to the part where I know JeKayla talked about curriculum, and I saw something in the chat that can go into that. But how can joy in being Black and the Black race be infused into the classroom or the school? So how can you infuse this concept into the classroom and the school? And I'm going to give this to Vonnie and JeKayla.
I think it's important to make sure there are real life connections, community relationships. This past school year, even with COVID, we were on Zoom, but it was still important for me to be able to tell the students and show the students like there is Black excellence all around you. So you can see it in a book, but you can see it in your real life too. And so I brought in a firefighter, actually 2 firefighters. There was an ER pediatric nurse, a chef that owns her own business came and talked to us, a community activist that was a very active part of the Black Lives Matter movement. All of these people who are proud Black people who are making huge contributions to our community talk to our students, and students were able to ask them questions about how they became a ER pediatric doctor and how did you become a firefighter and what made you decide to be a community activist. So I think bringing in those real world connections so students can see these are real people that I could talk to right now that are doing incredible things for the Black community and for our overall community. I think that's really important. And also allowing students to be co-constructors of the learning that's happening. So providing resources in the classroom that represent the Black culture and allowing students to have access to this, not that I'm feeding you or lecturing you about this is all what Black people did and you know, but giving them the information and allowing them to then be co-constructors of the knowledge and then see the humanity in it so they can make connections to themselves. So I think that's a very important way to infuse Black joy into the classroom.
Nice. Well, I think first and foremost, I think being a Black person, we already have the everything stacked against us. So building the person up, building up Black people is my main goal. I'm a cheerleader. I love to motivate and encourage. So the first thing I do with my classes is I incorporate words of affirmation and breathing. Very first thing we do in the morning, or very first thing I see them, words of affirmation so they can believe it. I am smart, I am strong, I am beautiful. I can do all things I put my mind to. So first and foremost, doing that every day, so that the more they say it, the more they believe it. And then after that, if they believe in themselves, they can accomplish anything. And then there comes joy. It's the stepping stones for me to infuse that Black joy in the classroom. And I also show them with my curriculum, even though it's not built in, I show them how resilient we are through all the obstacles we've been through as a people. So when I was teaching the civil rights movement last year, I created that open dialogue so that this idea of awkwardness of race can just be thrown out the window. I feel like race shouldn't be awkward. So just create an open dialogue with all students in the classroom, regardless of race. So I think that's how you bring joy into being yourself in the classroom.
Anybody else want to jump on that before I move to the next question? Ways to bring the joy of being Black and the joy of the Black race into the classroom?
I think JeKayla hit it right on the point. She mentioned stuff about curriculum and voice. I think those two things really do matter a whole lot. And I can think back onto my experience when I was teaching. My students always knew that they had voice in the classroom, and they also had choice. So I would say that they were most joyful when they told me how they wanted to learn. And it was very intentional. You know, my students didn't like packets and work, like they didn't like that. I knew that too. So we didn't learn that way, and I didn't teach that way. So it's definitely like making sure that we find out the unique styles of our students and then meeting them right where they are to best support them, because they'll tell you exactly what they want to know.
I think about this concept, and I'm trying to get the right verbiage to it, but it's like a firm grace. Like I think about, you know, like I was a teacher for a long time and worked in different capacities with kids. And even now, like I was explaining, or maybe I was talking to them before we got on, but I'm kind of in a building where I'm in kind of random touch points with kids. And I have these moments where some kids are like really down, you know, or some kids are really struggling. And some kids, like on the surface, you know, that often looks like to a teacher that knows that kid really well or deals with this kid every day, this kid's not following instructions, this kid's not, being engaged with what we're doing today, even though I have tried to give them this choice, even though I have tried to give them this voice. You know, some kids need a little bit more grace than others. But I wanted to pair it with the firmness, because you don't want to, like this savior complex, so you don't want to let kids slide by the wayside and do whatever they want to do, right? So it's a very delicate balance of like, I love you, and I'm going to give you the space that you need, but because I love you, I'm not going to let you do whatever you want to do, right? Like, if I didn't love you, I'd let you do whatever you want to do, and there would be no consequences for your actions, because I would just kind of let you run amok. But because I love you, there are boundaries to this, right? And I'm going to give you choice and voice, and I'm going to give you space and a hug, and then, we're going to continue to try to move on as best as we can, right? Day after day after day after day after day. And so I think that is so important to foster this joy, because one day they're going to show up very happy to be there, because you just loved on them even through their darkest times. And that goes for administrators with teachers too.
Yeah.
Sounds like it's that consistency piece. They got to know that we care.
Got to.
Yeah.
That was funny, because sometimes the worst kids love me so much, and I'm like, why? I'm always on your head. But I do it with love. Playing with love is key. You're right.
Absolutely. It sounds a lot like that warm, demanding teacher, being able to balance the warmth with the demand. All right, I'm going to direct this to Vonnie and Cornell. What advice do you have for white teachers about bringing Black joy into the classroom?
Cornell's illustration of the Monsters, Inc. is so spot on. I think it's really being intentional about not coming from a place of deficit, creating language that uplifts students and gives students hope and encourages students and motivates students. And I also think about what JeKayla said, those affirmations. It's a lot in what we say to kids, and not coming from this place of like, oh, we're concerned about the school to prison pipeline. Well, let's talk about the school to presidency pipeline, the school to entrepreneurial pipeline, the school to doctor pipeline. Let's start changing our language. Let's flip the perspective. Let's change the narrative. Because when we indoctrinate our students with this fear-based way of thinking, then it's hard for them to get past that, even as adults. Like we see it like, well, I didn't do good in school, so I didn't have a choice. And I started doing X, Y, and Z. And it's like, but you did have a choice, but you weren't given a chance because you weren't taught and spoken to in a way that will let you know, okay, maybe this didn't work out, but I still have hope to do something else. So the language is so important, how we talk to kids. So I can go on and on about that, but Cornell and JeKayla did a really great job of talking about the words, the language, what we say.
Yeah, thank you, Vonnie. I really appreciate that because you're so right. Like what we, the 3-6-9, what you think and what you say is what comes to be, right? Like, how we manifest. And I love what JeKayla is saying, like this repetition of mantras, right? I mean, that's prayer, right? I know there aren't maybe a lot of religious people in the room, or maybe there are, right? But like this idea of like repeating words, saying things out loud so that those vibrations like become real and then like bounce off the walls and bounce into you, right? Like this is like science, right? And it sounds like, ooh, like spiritual, but like we're on the way to like actually understanding the way a lot of these vibrations and reverberations work. And we've seen the benefits, right? The soft data, we've seen the impacts of these things in our classrooms for years, right? I think, yeah, the advice I have is similar to what I said earlier, right? I'll just reiterate the importance of the self-work. You cannot just show up and think that your presence, and this goes for all educators. Don't get me wrong. Like this doesn't just go for white educators, but right now we're specifically talking to white educators. But you can't just show up and believe that your presence is enough to empower kids, right? And even this language of like empowering people to do things, like all people have the power to do them themselves. Like you help them see the tools they already have to help empower themselves, right? Like, and when we take away like this idea of the me out of teaching, right? Like I'm just kind of like a vehicle for this to kind of run through. And I've done like the study and the work in order to clean my vehicle out, like my filtering system, right? And it's so important to read about bias, read about privilege, read about anti-racism. One of the principals that I work with at Brookside School literally spends her off time from work, researching anti-racist resources. And she's always resharing and always reposting things on her social media. And that's what, to me, like this idea of truly living this life that's going towards a certain end, right? Like there is no separation of work and home, right? I'm having these conversations with my parents. I'm having these conversations with my racist uncle. I'm having these conversations at Thanksgiving and Christmas where talking about politics isn't kosher, right? Like we have to be living this on a daily basis in every moment of life, not just, when I'm in the school now I'm a social justice warrior, right? Like, oh, and I'm a teacher, right? Like, no, like being a teacher is a revolutionary act. Like it is a political act. These two things meld to your life together.
Okay, I like that. Also, the
Yeah.
fact that is they have to educate themselves before they start working through that in the classroom. So,
and let me just say, we don't have Bettina Love with us here, but a quote that she would respond to this question with. She says, white folks can also embrace Black joy by helping, advocating for, and wanting Black folks to win. Recognizing and acknowledging white privilege is cute, but what does it mean without action? If folks with privilege are not using their privilege to demand justice and advocate for dark folks and all their identities, then they are complicit in white rage or male rage, and thus are condoning injustice, violence, and the educational survival complex.
Yes, that's right on.
Can I say thing about it? I think what I've seen just in my 1 year of teaching is that the people around me, the white people around me kind of are a little bit enabling. I'm not going to say, well, they're enabling because they don't give them high expectations. And I think that's a bit of a problem when they expect the kids to already perform low. And so they're like, yeah, you did it, even though you're so low. I think the idea is to have high expectations and coach them up to that goal. And so I don't think the coaching is there at all times, or sometimes with some people. So not enabling, setting high expectations so the kids can feel a sense of accomplishment.
Yes.
And I really want to emphasize too, like what we just heard about this idea of having more privilege and bringing more guns to the war, right? Like, and you know, like in a less, you know, less poetic way, right? This idea of like having privilege and having more weapons, and expecting you to shoot more, right? Like the movie that I use for white people is Django. And if you watch Django, if you watch Dr. King Schultz like does a really great job of like following a playbook of how to be an accomplice, right? We don't talk about allies. I think collectively we've moved past allies. I think the community chose co-conspirators as the word they like. I like accomplices, right? Like, because they're committing crime. This is a crime, right? Like we know that actually like fighting for justice in our country has been illegal for a very long time, right? So like this actually is like a person that I need next to me helping me commit a crime, right? And Dr. King Schultz does a really great job of doing that throughout the movie. And at the end, he actually like gives up his life in order to not allow this system to continue harming people, right? And like he uses his privilege throughout the movie to bring Django up and get him to where he needs to be, and then got the hell out of the way for Django to win, right? And let Django be the hero, right? And this idea of bring resources to the battle and then like want Black people to win and do what it takes to allow Black people to win is so important for white folks out here that claim to be a part of the work.
I agree. I like accomplices too. So because it is, I mean, you know, it hasn't been easy to make these movements, and we just saw this a year ago. So in, you know, way from the historical movements. So this question is for Marquis. So as we've talked about Black joy, talk about what results you've seen from infusing Black joy in the classroom as a former teacher.
So I've seen Black joy almost in every aspect of my day teaching. One of the things that I noticed is that the students really wanted to come to school. Oftentimes, you know, you see them there early, and if you're there early, they're like, I just want to come and see you. So they're joyful about just being able to see you at school or even in the community. You know, when you go grocery shopping and you see them, they're super excited to see you there. Other things that I even thought about were that like students were able to come up with their own ways to solve problems. That's really, really important because we want to teach our kids to be critical thinkers and so that they can solve the problems of the 21st century and beyond. Students also are able to take charge of their own learning. And then when they do that, we're able to celebrate them. They're able to celebrate themselves the way that they want to. One really good example of this is the last school I taught at, we did programs about every month or two. And when we did the school-wide assemblies or programs, the students actually took charge of that. They told me what they wanted to do, and we would just come together and form it to something that would be, you know, nice for the school. But essentially, the students definitely had a voice in what they were going to do or perform. And then the last thing that I would even share is that students get to be authentically themselves through their language, their dress, and even their behaviors. There was a student I had this past year, and we were talking about place value, and the number was like 4,127. Well, when I asked her to read the number aloud to me into the class, she said the number is 4,127. So instantly she thought I was going to say something. So she had a smile on her face and I had a smile on my face. And eventually we both just started laughing, and so did the class. So that's just another good example of like just making sure that we are valuing the languages that the students are bringing to us, and we're not dismissive of them.
And just to go back to, you talked about the policy about suspensions. Did you see a decrease, or, you know, we talked before the panel about your first experience in teaching and not knowing how to really do those things. As you moved into being that strong teacher, did you see less behaviors or less where you needed to suspend from those actions?
For sure. I would say when I was a first year teacher, I definitely struggled with management, and my administrators were about suspending the students in a lot of the cases. But as I went through like the last 5 years, I got better at it. You know, eventually the classroom started managing itself. There was no need for a clip chart. There was no need to make a phone call home. The students just bought into what we were doing in the classroom. They were excited. They wanted to be there. Like the worst thing that I could tell a student was, you got to go to another classroom for the next 20 minutes. They didn't want to do that. So they made sure that they were regulated, or they had strategies to cope so that they could be successful in the classroom environment.
Thank you.
Joy is 10 times stronger than fear, right? Like you can have these punitive measures of like, oh, I'm gonna give you a demerit, or I'm gonna get you suspended, or you can say, you're not gonna be able to you're gonna miss out on this wonderful learning opportunity, right?
Yes, and I just wanted to piggyback on that when we talk about academic ownership, and when teachers are meeting with coaches or whatever the case may be, and they're being assessed, and they're like, well, what about that academic ownership piece? You know, we're observing you to see that academic ownership. That's how you do it. That's the academic ownership right there, allowing the students to have joy. And something that I've heard that's always stuck with me is, don't be the sage on the stage lecturing the class and saying like, this is my classroom and this is how we're going to do things at all times, but be the guide on the side. Allow them to create norms with you. Allow them to co-construct. I'm so big on that. Allow them to be a part of the learning. So it's not you feeding them information, it's them working side by side with you and learning and growing and developing those skills. And like Marquis said, your behavior issues will decrease because they've bought in. They want to be in the classroom. This is their classroom. They've taken ownership over everything that's going on. They know that they can be themselves authentically. They don't have this space and presence of fear or, you know, acting out, because it's a safe space. So I think that's just so important. And like Cornell said, I'm just gonna say it again, joy is 10 times greater than fear.
Mhm.
And,
Well,
I love
sorry.
that. Mhm.
I was
No, I
going
was
to
just
say,
gonna say, I
Vonnie's
love that.
speaking-
So we're
Sorry.
going to say, you go ahead, Hilary.
I was just going to say, you know, Vonnie's speaking about that impact on the classroom when you're the guide on the side, and thinking about what that could mean for schools and districts and communities, and you know, just being able to push that outside the classroom as well, where they're co-constructing.
And I just will say the one key thing that I heard Vonnie say is, when we talk about my classroom as the teacher, but then we want the kids to feel like they belong in there, you know? And so that is in some of the best classrooms I observed is the kids know that it's their classroom, you know? And so just having that feeling of, like you said, the student ownership goes a long way. So perfect. Well, I'll let you go into our Q&A.
Okay, yeah, so we would like to encourage participants to enter any questions they have in the Q&A box. And I'll start with one. This question says, how do you explain Black joy to the masses without racializing or even marginalizing it? And this person says, I can see this turning into a sort of all joy matters, kind of like all lives matter, I think is the reference there.
Sometimes I think what's missing is the humanity piece. I think people, sometimes I feel like when we talk about Black lives, it's like, but do we see the humanity? Do you recognize that we are people, that we're individual people who are like you in many ways, and we're different than you in many ways? So when we talk about not like racializing it or marginalizing it, let's humanize it. This is a person. We are people. We have families. We're contributing to this society. And it just makes me think back to a lot of the things in Black history, kind of what Cornell was saying, that are implicit because they're not being taught, or the stories that are null because we're not speaking on things in that way. So I think just humanizing how we talk about the Black culture and bringing people in, like I had mentioned earlier, like bringing real life people in our community that are doing incredible things and showing them like how that joy exudes into our community as well. That's what I would say to that question.
I would even say we need to make sure that we provide a space for our students to be able to speak about their experiences. And I can see many of this work translated into like affinity groups. And I know that's a question that like affinity groups get all the time. Is like, how are y'all doing this? And then y'all are like marginalizing people. Well, the whole goal of it of an affinity group is to bring about a change in a school or a school system. So we need to make sure that we're providing spaces for our students to speak up and have their voices heard and actually get something done to make them feel more included in the school or school system.
I would say also incorporating or just educating our students, regardless of race, about Black history and Black culture and the obstacles we went through. And also, what was I going to say? I forget, but educating them, yes.
And I mean, I think that's where my mind goes. Like I understand this question, but like lynching is a real thing, right? So like like when we think about all joy matters, or even like all lives matter, right? I understand that and I don't hierarchize or minimize any culture's struggle or any person's perspective, right? But Black trauma in the United States is off the charts. And if you can't, like, if we can first like stop and recognize that, right? Then I think it can be, I think the next like logical step is to say that like we should take some time for equity, right? And equity is just as simple as like the squeaky wheel gets the grease, right? Like my alternator in my car is out right now, and I bought a battery. If you know anything about cars, right? Like, oh no, like kind of have to do this like guessing game with like whether or not it's your battery or your alternator when your battery dies, right? And like I bought the wrong part, right? Like I'm going to buy an alternator in my car because my car needs an alternator, right? Black people should be exalted and given more space for joy because previously that joy has been more intentionally taken away, right? And that joy has been like intentionally martyred, right? And so if we can take the time to again employ a sense of empathy and equity for what a certain group of people has gone through, then this concept of like whitewashing or all washing movements, I think becomes a little bit more difficult, I hope.
Yeah, and I remember I was going to say, just flipping the narrative. There you go. Flipping the narrative, because the media shows only the negative and bad things about Black people. So like Vonnie was saying, how she brings in firefighters and people of color to show that we are amazing and we can do all these things. I think just flipping the narrative to show that we all don't go to prison. We also do other things too, you know?
Okay, any other questions? Okay, I'll move into the closing. And basically, in closing, what I'd like to do is kind of bring about some thoughts that have come up in the panelist conversation. One is when we first started talking about Black joy, I thought about how, you know, when I feel Black joy, I hear it through some of the songs I sang in church when I was young, you know, like they immediately make me smile and sing. And it makes me think of those songs were created through the struggle, through the pain, but now it provides joy for us. And so just those things that we think about. I heard you all talk about, we talked about how to educate all students about this, that it's very important that we make sure all students do know this, because I do feel that it's part of a plan to undereducate everyone about these historical concepts and these historical events. And so when you think about it, a lot of the arguments I would see on social media between Black and white people, the white people weren't educated about certain issues and certain things. And so they could continue to counteract that argument and say, oh, that was so long ago. Oh, that didn't happen. So I think that's something that we really need to think about. It's for all children. Then I think the other piece we talked about Black joy and how students feel in the classroom. And I will tell you, in my new role, one of the things is it's very difficult for us to find more teachers of color, especially Black teachers, because of the issue in the classroom about joy. They don't align school and joy together. So if we can get that correlation going a lot more, we could have more educators out there. And then I saw something that was in the article that we had, I wanted to share. I thought this point was really good because I think it goes back to something Vonnie was saying. Joy is a part of the human experience. When we separate Black people's struggles from their humanity, we see them as less than human. When we see them as less than human, it becomes easier to justify continued racial disparities in society. So that was from Jana Hoover, and I thought that was a good quote because that's it. If we continue to only look at struggles, people continue to not humanize the Black race. So in closing, I really want to thank all of the panelists. And I have to say, just to give a little shout out from teachers like me, JeKayla is a first year coming to KCPS for teachers like me. So this will be her first year in Kansas City Public Schools. And Marquis is one of my advisory board members. So I like how this comes together and UMKC is a partner. So I thank you all for being here today. Thank you, Hilary, for putting this together. And thank all of our people there watching and asking questions.
Absolutely. Thank you all to the panelists and Trinity. I will just close by putting our resource slide here for those attendees who may want to tap into any of these resources. We thank you all for attending and hope that this work is going to continue in classrooms and schools in Kansas City and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you.